So thank you, everyone. Welcome to this Seven Foundation online event, talking about artificial intelligence and the possibility of reimagining history and reimagining the future. We've hosted a series of events and published a couple of articles on AI over the last year or so, discussing all the challenges and all the problems in relationship to photojournalism and visual journalism. But we haven't previously spoken to anyone who actually used AI, so I was very keen to get Phil Toledano on to talk about his projects, Another America, We're at War, and so on. Because I think in this debate, it's essential that we discuss how it's made, what are the limits, what are the possibilities, what are the challenges, even from within the perspective of using the technology and so on. So Phil, thank you very much for joining us. Just as a kind of a starting question, what first attracted you to the possibility of using AI technology?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks for inviting me. It's sort of like the Pope inviting Satan over for tea. Uh, so, so I appreciate your open-mindedness. Well, I guess I've been working on a project about conspiracy theories in America for quite a few years now. I've been very interested. You actually mentioned the thing that I've been fascinated with, which is the way in which, particularly in America, people inhabit entirely different realities, and those realities are so real to them.
Yeah.
And my reality is as real as mine is, but they exist with almost different laws of physics, different facts, different history, and I found that really, really fascinating. And then when AI showed up, it occurred to me immediately that this is the demise of truth. We've lived from, let's just say the invention of photogravure and newspapers in, say, the early 1920s. We've lived with the photograph as truth, in quotes, for a while now, and that idea is now gone. And we have this kind of Schrodinger's cat situation where, because of the existence of AI, everything is true and nothing is true simultaneously. And I find that really interesting. Now, look, I understand that as a conceptual artist, I don't work under the strict scripture that you guys work under. I have much wider parameters in terms of what I explore. But immediately I started thinking about the elasticity of truth and the elasticity of history. So I started with the first project, which was Another America. And if you want, do you want me to just run through some of those slides?
Yeah.
The idea behind Another America is to sort of reinvent a period of history in New York, say from the 1940s to the early 1950s. And it was published as a book last year, and the book starts with these images that are could be street photography from the 40s and 50s. Now, the reason I chose the 40s and 50s is because we're sort of predisposed when we see images from that era to assume they're real. And I wanted in this project to oscillate between images that seem definitively real or could be real, and images that are clearly surreal. I call this whole idea historical surrealism. But I want to toggle between surreal and real because that's going to mirror our experience with media going forward. We're always going to be in this situation now where we're sort of like asking ourselves, is this true? Is this not true? So, and then I worked with a really talented friend of mine, a writer called John Kenny, who writes for The New Yorker, and he wrote these fictitious stories to accompany the fictitious images. So for this particular story, for Image, for instance, it was about how there was this trend that started on the West Coast in Hollywood where people would wrap their cars, film stars would wrap their cars in exotic furs. And when I would post these images with these stories, people would email me like, is this true? I Googled it. I'd Googled it to find out this was true. And to me, that's the kind of required response, because I want that sense of unknowingness to happen when you look at these images. So the thing that was really interesting about this was the first really big project I did with AI. And the thing that I found utterly fascinating is that I've been taking pictures for 40 years with a camera.
Yeah.
And when you take pictures with a camera, everything is unconscious. The way you approach a place, a scene, a situation, and because you've been taking pictures for so long, all your responses are reflexes for the most part. You understand the nature of narrative, you understand the nature of drama, you understand the nature of architecturally how you frame a picture. But with AI, everything is entirely conscious. So even though it looks like photography, the creative process is nothing. It's more akin to, say, writing or making a movie. So when I was writing this story of this 10-year period of history, I was thinking about who lived there? What did they wear? What were the fashions of the times? What were the disasters, the terrible tragedies of the time? And then you start working through these ideas, like what are the tragedies? And you start thinking about this sort of thing in a narrative, filmic sense. So clearly very surreal. Some of the images kind of echo some of the things that happened in contemporary history. So this was a story about a particular kind of flu that spread across New York City, and this was the protective measures that people took. Then one of the other things I did, but that I thought was interesting, is when you're reinventing a period of time, a period of history, I thought, well, why not reinvent everything? Why not reinvent humanity's relationship with animals and have animals equally sentient, so the same level as people? So you'd have these, there was a story about homeless apes. There was a story about these orphans of New York who were kind of protected and guided by animals who were sentient. And then last but not least, when you think about a period of history, cities always have landmarks. So I thought, well, why not introduce my own invented landmarks? So that's Another America. So Another America, as I said, we sort of toggle between surreal and real. So there are, but I thought to myself, I want to do a project that is utterly convincing to people, that show, because I think the problem with AI for a lot of people, regular people, not civilians, not photographers, is that for the most part, the AI we're exposed to is surreal and kind of crazy, Salvador, the Pope in a nightclub, a lot of really kind of hyper surreal stuff. And people often say of AI, well, it's never going to be as good as photography. It's never going to have the emotional power of photography. And I don't think that's true. So I wanted to make a project that was utterly convincing, so that if you saw it, you'd be moved by it. You'd be emotionally moved by it, by the power of it. And then when you realized you'd been fooled, it would be such an emotional impact, that realization that you'd been bamboozled. So I was invited to a residency in Normandy, and of course it was the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. So I thought, well, who better to think about than Robert Capa, the kind of, the Moses of photojournalism. And of course, the thing about Capa that's interesting, so there's this story I'm sure you're all familiar with, this idea that he shot 4 rolls of film, sent the film back to England, it got destroyed, only these 11 holy images survived. So I thought, well, first of all, Capa was not above kind of reimagining his own history. As we all know, the death of a loyalist soldier from the Spanish Civil War has now been proven to be fake. And then there's a good possibility that he never really shot those 4 rolls. He just buggered off on a boat back to England, as I would have done, because I'm sure it was terrifying. But nevertheless, this story created like an empty pocket of history that I thought I could fill and reimagine a lost roll of his film. So when it came to publishing this instead of doing a book, I thought I'm going to mine Capa's history a little bit more. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Mexican suitcase, this suitcase full of lost eggs. So I thought, okay, I will create a lost artifact. I'm going to extend this lie further. So not only am I going to create this lost roll of film, but I'm going to create a contact sheet of the lost roll of film. And then that's a V letter, which is what which US servicemen would, it was a free mail service, and in that is the artist's statement, and then this newspaper from 1944 in which are printed the images. And then as an extra bit of bonus nerdery, I wrote a first-person article in the voice of Hemingway, because Capa collaborated with Hemingway at one point or another. So I thought, I'm going to write an article in the voice of Hemingway that's the first person about landing at D-Day landing. So we have that. So we have the newspaper. I also made little advertisements in the newspaper, just because there's this amazing kind of jarring juxtaposition between like these banal ads, and then these images of war.
Yep.
Pizza place. So this is, I don't know if you guys can see on the screen, but basically the contact sheet is sort of a narrative. Because I was thinking about, okay, if you have a roll of film in your camera in 1944, chances are that you haven't got access to a lot of film. You're going to husband that film. That roll of film will last 2 or 3 days, maybe, right? You're not going to be shooting. It's not like shooting digital.
Yeah.
So if you can see the top image on the top left starts off in the pubs in London or in England somewhere, and then you go through this whole kind of 3-day period. So you start off in the pubs, you're on the docks, you're on the landing boats, you're in the water, you're on the beaches, the battle occurs, then there's the aftermath of the battle, the detritus of the battle, the dead bodies, all this kind of thing. So there's this whole narrative. And then to boot, just to make it extra, look, I fully realize, having shot photography for 40 years, that a contact sheet, a good contact sheet, you have two, you're lucky if you get 2 images that are killer on a contact sheet. This is like a fantasy sheet with whatever 15, 20 like Pulitzer Prize winning images on there. Of course, I know that's not possible. But I also have images here that are overexposed, underexposed, blurry, misfires, all that kind of thing, because why not?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have these images. So the work was shown in France, and the idea was to show these images and to not explain what they were until at the end of the show. So people walked through, saw these pictures, felt what they felt, and then at the end realized they'd been fooled. And that was kind of the idea behind it. And look, I also know, I mean, this may be heretical to say, but I never felt Capa was a particularly great photographer. He just happened to be in front of history, he was amazing at being in front of history.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was never enamored of his framing and all the rest of it. And I know these pictures, I mean, these are, it's easy to make a great image if you're sitting on your sofa and you have 3 hours or a couple of days to make it. I'm fully aware that of the risks and dangers involved. So this is the aftermath of the battle. And that's kind of it. And I know that if you're a history nerd, you look at these images and it's clear that it's clear there's a lot of things wrong with them from a material perspective. The gear's wrong, that the uniforms aren't quite right, all this kind of stuff. But if you don't know these things, which most people don't, they really matter. And it was really extraordinary to watch people look at the work and then see their reaction when they realize they've been had. Because I think it's important. All my work about AI is about this idea that around the death of truth, around the idea that because we kind of exist in this perfect storm. We have the perfect technology, which makes utterly convincing imagery, and we have the perfect system of dissemination, which is the phone. And then we have multiple channels on the phone. We have no attention span. We have tiny images, which means people aren't going to really be like pinching and zooming to look at, check for veracity of detail.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious now how it works, how truth works, how conversation works. Do we go back to like a pre-image era? Like, how did people understand the truth and the news in, say, the 17th century, before there was literacy, before there was really newspapers? How did that work? Is that the model we go back to? I'm not sure. And it's, so that's what this work is about. It's a warning, but I'm also curious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I see it. My job as a conceptual artist is to be curious. Is to open every window to open and consider the vista, and that's what I'm doing with AI.
Yeah. Do you think the people in the exhibition were actually fooled, and then it was the big reveal at the end, or do you think that? I mean,
yes. Well, here's why. Because
sense that it was. Some might have been skeptical to start with, and there was increasing skepticism as they went on.
Well, the only reason is because because for the first couple of days I hung around like a creepy stalker,
Yep.
and I just followed people. and I listened to their conversation. So, and then I would talk to people at the end, because once I was identified as the artist, then they would come and talk to me. And it was really gratifying actually to have those conversations. But yeah, I mean, almost everyone was fooled.
Yeah. So when we think about the source of truth, then, do you think some of the reason they were fooled is not only the photorealistic nature of these images, but the fact that it was also in an establishment institution, this place of an exhibition in Normandy and so on. And so
Possibly.
was
Possibly.
that context was also one of the drivers for
Sure.
saying these things are true, because the people are thinking, well, they're not going to hang false things on the wall, are they?
I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, but I
Yeah,
would say this also, that I think, going back to something I said earlier, I think if you get an image like this on your phone, you're going to look at it, and I think that you would just assume it's true and then move on to the next image on your phone.
yeah,
Do you know? Because we don't live in a society where we're really interested in finding out.
yeah.
Like we were saying earlier, we're mostly interested in being upset.
Yes, angry, outraged,
Right.
infuriated, and so
Sure.
on, rather than asking the question and so on.
Sure.
But even on the phone, I mean, no image, I think, ever in photography has ever appeared by itself without something around it. Be it a caption, be it text, be it in a museum. Even on the phone, it's going to come to you in a particular way,
Sure.
and the way it comes to you is also going to either support or undermine the claims to truth in that.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
that's perfectly true. It's
yeah,
just, I guess I watch my 15-year-old daughter and the way she looks at the phone and the way she interacts with imagery,
yeah,
and it's just, I mean, it's just the swiping, right? Like, I mean, people, you're right, things come into context, but I think that the context is so. I don't think we're even interested in context anymore. Like, we just look at the thing and then we move on to the next thing. And if we're lucky, maybe we'll read the comments, because you want to see, like, if something looks off, you will go to the comments to see if other people feel similarly.
yeah,
Maybe.
yeah. Well, my namesake says that you're right, and people just don't care.
Well, I think that's actually an interesting point, and I wonder if I wonder if this is just this obsession we have with the truth, and this terror and fear we have about the truth is maybe like limited to the 0.01% of people, like, who are educators, journalists, teachers, and for the rest of the world, they just want to make sure that they can go and get their beer and they can watch the game on TV, and maybe they just don't care,
Yeah,
which is a
maybe.
kind of bleak assessment, but maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, I think this is one thing that's very hard to know, because even, if you've spent time in academia doing research, there doesn't seem to be much research on these sorts of questions. Actually, there's a huge kind of gap here. So I was speaking with one of our photographers who was recounting an anecdote, a bit like you being the creepy stalker following people around the exhibition.
Right.
Um, a friend of his was following viewers around an exhibition in Perpignan, where there was, of course, completely straight photojournalism on the wall, and the viewers were just skeptical the whole way around. So it's the complete obverse of your
Oh, interesting. And
experience.
skeptical of what specific? Was it there?
They
Was
looked at these
skeptical?
amazing photographs, which were authentically made by the named individual and the photographer, and they're like, "Is that fake? Is that real? How did they do
Well,
that?"
exactly. So that's my bloody point. The Schrodinger's cat thing. Like, we're always in a state of, is it real or is it not now?
Yeah,
And I mean, that feeling is 2 years old,
yeah,
and it is global. I mean, that's actually a fascinating story to hear.
yeah,
That even at I mean, and as you say, to your point earlier about context, so there they
exactly.
are in a context where everything is supposed to be true, and they're not sure if it's true. It's the
Yeah,
reverse of your point.
yeah, yeah,
That's
totally.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Question from Lauren.
Well, the why is obvious, because listen, it would be naive to assume that this isn't happening already. So isn't it better that someone is trying to talk about this in a way that's to raise questions Isn't it better that someone is out there saying, hey, this is happening, here's how convincing it can be, let's talk about it? What's the alternative? To not talk about it?
Yeah. And I would take a slightly different tack to yours. I'm not sure that we've reached the death of truth, because I'm not sure that we had the complete faith in photographic truth up to the 1940s and 50s. I think that those things were a little fuzzier.
But but if I can interrupt, I
Yep,
would say, I think that's the point of view of someone who's a non-civilian.
maybe.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I think
Yeah,
for
yeah,
most people who look at the paper, look at magazines, there was always an assumption this is just real because it's a picture.
yeah, maybe.
If you know the history of photography, sure, Matthew Brady,
Yeah.
Robert Capa, endless other people, Russian propaganda, etc. I mean, there's endless examples of all that stuff.
My only, I'll bring in another question in a second. My only anecdote, because I do think there's a lack of research in this area, my only anecdote that would respond to that would be, I'm always surprised how often when an image in the news is revealed as being artifice in some way or manipulated in some way, how much outrage there is.
Right.
And I don't know if that outrage is evidence of kind of latent faith in the veracity of images, or it's just outrage. I'm not sure. But that's one of the things that leads me to think that even for, as you say, the civilians, it's a little bit fuzzier. I don't know. Um, Related, this question from Hillary.
Well,
That's
actually, that's very interesting, and
yeah,
I suspect I suspect that's a new development because we are so, like, particularly in America, everyone has their own history now. So I think you're right that if that image doesn't correspond to your version of history or truth, then it's most likely not true. But I feel like that's a pretty new development. But I think that's absolutely true.
yes. And in fairness to Hillary, she also added in a second point that she was talking about in recent years.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I think that's perfectly true for sure.
yeah, yeah. Comment and a question from Vincent about whether people care or don't care. Do you think AI has, because of
More
this, more chances of being catchy? I guess,
Well, I
provided.
guess the thing about AI is that it gives you I mean, the thing I love about AI, if I may just explain my romance with Satan, is is the it's exciting to be able to imagine as far as you can imagine. That AI will go with you as far as you want to go, and just from the sheer perspective of like a Magritte level kind of surrealism, that's kind of amazing. So can you make super catchy? You're asking if you can make super catchy images, like catchy, like is AI? I guess you could say AI is kind of like the sugary fast food of the visual world, right? Like you
Mm,
can make and it's addictive. Like it gives you this sugar high. You can make these images that are if you have a good imagination, incredible. Um, and that's exciting if you're not a photojournalist.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, maybe AI images will ultimately be catchier if I understand your question correctly, because they're kind of the junk food sugar high.
Yeah. Um, there was a comment and a question about that. So, kind of in relationship to the exhibition of We Are at War, do you think you achieved the emotional connection among the viewers?
Well, I mean, look, it's purely anecdotal, and I can only relay my experience based on a couple of days of hanging around and talking to people. But I mean, the people I spoke to, yes. I mean, it would be a very there's no like subjective or rather objective statistical analysis. I wish there was. I mean, I love to say like 82% of people who saw my work felt emotionally moved, but sadly I can't say that. But from talking to people, yes. But
Yeah,
that's a tiny sample.
yeah. A comment from Simon. Do you see it as blue pill versus red pill? That it's kind of creating images that act as a comfort blanket?
Well, I think that depends on the project. Um, I mean, I think that really depends on what the project is, what the idea is. AI, I say this again and again, but AI is a tool. It's a paintbrush, right? I mean, it's incredibly potent and powerful, but it is a tool.
Yeah.
So it just depends on the power of the idea. If the idea is powerful, it will confront us. If the idea is, soma, was that the stuff from Brave New World, the tranquilizer that everyone would drink?
Yes.
Then it will comfort us, right? So it depends on the objective of the idea and the power of the idea, for sure.
Yeah. No one's asked a how question, so I want to ask the how question. I mean, when you're using, there are various text to image AI tools and so on. Give us a little bit more of an insight into like what tools you used,
Sure.
how you worked on the prompt, because making the prompt in terms of what you ask the tool to do is part of the thing that establishes what you can get back. And then what level of refinement do you have to do after that to
Sure.
produce images like the ones that you've got?
Well, I'll start by saying that I never use the phrase like a Robert Capa photograph. Even I have some ethical boundaries. Uh, and also, I will also say this, that these images, if you know Capa, these images look nothing like his photography. I
Yeah.
mean, first of all, they look, the framing, all of it, they don't look like his pictures. I actually make everything on my phone. Which is amazing to me because it means I could be making work instead of like, doom scrolling when I'm waiting for a friend at a coffee shop. I can be
Right.
making art, which is amazing to me. Working with AI is so interesting. It's sort of like it's like working with a really talented but quite drunk person. Uh, and so and I've always been incredibly stringent with my ideas, very controlling about when I shoot photography, I'm always incredibly dictatorial about what's in the frame. And it's the same, and whether the idea is my photography, video, painting, whatever it happens to be, I'm very controlling. But with AI, you have to be much more elastic because it's a very drunk creative person. It will sometimes give you things that are sort of slightly adjacent to the idea that you had, and you have to be kind of flexible enough to go, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted, but I'll go down that path. And the thing that I find very interesting about the creative process, it's the entire opposite of photography. Photography is sort of like it's the click of the shutter. It's a split second. And sure, you can kind of work around the place you're at and try and think through an image. But with AI, it's more like whittling a stick till you get to the sharpest possible point. And that whittling process can take hours or days sometimes to get to and the thing that I use Midjourney exclusively.
Okay.
And I don't really do anything after I try and keep it in quotes pure. So I don't do anything to the picture. I want it to be exactly as it came out from Midjourney. But what you can do in Midjourney, which is amazing, is you can change things, you can adjust things within the image. So once you get to an image you kind of like, then you can endlessly alter just tiny little details within the image to make it as close as to how you would see an image if you took it as a photograph as you can.
Right.
And that's very interesting. I find the process very enjoyable, like this kind of constant whittling and refining. I don't know, just probably something about my OCD nature.
I mean, I think one of the interesting things there, I'm interested that you use Midjourney because I ran an experiment. I published this article in our dispatches blog looking at kind of trying to, as a non-technical person, trying to understand AI technology and how it is still a question. It is a probabilistic process.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a reservoir of images that it's pulling out. It diffuses images into digital code, and then it kind of reconstructs them in a probabilistic way, which is what you describe as kind of the drunken person pulling in things that are kind of near it, because the algorithm as it works is pulling in things that it thinks might be similar but could be completely out of context and different. But I ran this.
Stop me if I'm wrong, because I feel like maybe you know more about this than me. But as I understand it, I know that it doesn't. One of the popular misconceptions is sort of Frankenstein's images together. Like he'll take an eyeball from here and a hand from here and all this. And I know it doesn't do that. But my understanding is that in the training process, it basically learns to see. Is that correct? And in some ways, I think that if that's true, then it mirrors the artistic process, because every photograph I've ever taken is an amalgam, a result of everything I've ever seen. And that's kind of how Midjourney works. Every image it generates is a result of everything it's seen, guided by you.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's a reasonable description. I'll just post the link to that article for people there. But I start the article by pointing out that if you've ever completed one of those security capture things on a website where it says pick out the bus, you've contributed to training an AI model, because what that's doing is telling the database the thing that's that shape is a bus, and the thing that looks like a car is not a bus. So the machine doesn't know a bus, it just knows what we've said is by clicking on that, and by default what isn't. So you're right, it's not pulling eyeballs or whatever, it's digital code and so on, but the algorithm is things are coded in various ways with what they call tokens, so that if you're trying to create a human, it's going through the database that we've helped it create, and also that has been, of course, illegally scraped from the internet and other sources without copyright and without remuneration to do that. So that's why these weird things turn up in that process. But anyway, in the article, I run this experiment where one of our photographers, Thomas van Houtgreeve, 2 years ago, put in prompts to Midjourney to create photorealistic images in the style of a seven photographer of a war crime and of a weapons of mass destruction lab in Iraq, which of course did not exist. And Midjourney produced those images. I ran the experiment. I used DALL-E with those things, and it came back and said, "I can't do that. Sorry." There were obviously guardrails in place, but then I went back to Midjourney again, and it would still do it. So
right. Well, I mean, my whole AI. I had this in the earlier version of the presentation, but my whole AI journey, my realization of kind of inventing history.
Yeah.
It started with this. I had played around with AI or Midjourney a couple of years ago, and then I was sort of unimpressed. But then I started thinking about, this is during the election, or this is actually before. Well, I had this notion that what if Donald Trump had been born poor? What would his life look like? And I made a series of images of Donald Trump's life as a middle class or poor person. And when I made those images, it kind of opened my eyes to the possibility of inventing history. But to your point, when I went back recently to try and redo those images, it wouldn't let me do that.
Yeah.
Because you can't. But there are ways around the parameters. I mean,
yes, definitely.
Yeah, you can kind of slalom around them. Like I did a series of images of a NRA gift shop. What things would the NRA sell if it had a gift shop? And one was a bloodied doll of a student, and you couldn't use the word blood. It's very grim, but anyway, you can't do that. So I just used ketchup instead of blood, and then it'll do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are endless ways to slalom around the whole process.
Yeah. This is an interesting question from Tim. I have an answer to this question, but you go first.
Excellent question, Tim, and I have no idea. I mean, I would imagine, I think that's probably right. Like as the level of AI, as the level of images, the percentage increases on the net, it's going to be kind of eating itself, I think, which is fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I'm waiting for AI to be able to generate its own stuff without me being there, which I'm sure will happen.
Yeah. So the answer to Tim's question from one research paper is no, actually.
Because, really?
Yes. So at the end,
not see them as photographs.
I put this in at the end of my article. Hani Farid at Berkeley with a co-author did this experiment where they trained an AI model and slowly introduced AI generated imagery into the training data. And even from 3% poisoning, as they called it, of the data with AI imagery, the output started to break down. And so that you could not generate a photorealistic human face. It would just become distorted with colored pixels or whatever.
Oh, interesting.
You can
Wow,
see
that's
the examples at the end of my article on that.
Oh, I was
And
looking.
that's
Yeah, I
really,
was looking at that. That's interesting, man. Is
yeah.
that because I guess it's not. Is it? What's the reason for that? Is it not seeing those images as photography?
Well, it's a very good question. He doesn't have enough. He's probably the foremost expert on detection and manipulation in this
Mm.
technology, and he doesn't have an answer actually as to why it breaks down. He can demonstrate that it does break down like this, so they'll have to do some more work on that. But you can see it's kind of a contact sheet of the breakdown at the end of my article, and it shows that once you get to 100%, it's absolutely completely worthless. Which, of course, is why AI companies scrape real photos. But if they're going to want to keep generating that stuff, they're going to need more and more real photos, which in a ideal world would be an opportunity for
Right.
photographers. But that's probably not how a lot of AI companies work on that. But it is interesting. Nonetheless, there is this phenomenon, you referenced it, of AI slop, basically just this cheaply generated stuff, which is breaking down even further social media because it's just trying to game the algorithm, by coming up with outrageous images that people respond to or click on or whatever.
But I mean, AI, basic AI generated images has a very specific style that
Yes.
you can just tell immediately. I mean, the good
Yes.
news is if you're a photographer, is that you will be so far ahead of the game in terms of making really beautiful images with AI that look like photography, because you understand, like I was saying earlier, narrative, you understand light, you understand, weather, you understand all these things. And for most people, that's not a consideration. So when they use AI, they're not thinking about, oh,
Yeah.
maybe it should be, 5:30 p.m. because the light's going to be soft. And what about a little bit of fog in the background to diffuse the light? Well, they're not having those thoughts because they don't, they're not photographers.
Yeah. Yeah. Which kind of in sort of the search for an anchor for truth or an anchor for veracity is the author of the image the last line of defense.
Well, I guess it depends on the intentions of the author. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm sure that Trump and all his minions, they're the authors of whatever. I'm sure they're going to be pumping out stuff over the
Yeah.
next 4 years, which I'm sure they'll feel will be perfectly valid because it's in defense of democracy.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think, though, that Dennis is onto a point there in the sense that if you have an author with good intentions and is transparent about their intentions and so on, that is a possible anchor for veracity. And I think
Sure.
one of the stronger ones for sure. Um, and that's,
But also it depends what you mean. What do you mean by veracity?
yeah,
Like like to someone's point, asking me about whether I'm contributing to the demise of truth.
yeah,
I'm trying to have a conversation about this, but people are having a go at me, right?
yeah,
So am I not, are my intentions not true? You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like
yeah.
it's an interesting question.
Well, then we're deep into the philosophical realm of
That's right.
truth.
That's
But that's
right.
why I think also here there's a distinction actually between notions of truth as kind of a narrative about the world and ideas about accuracy and verification and so on, which are
Sure.
much more specific about that.
Sure.
I mean, I want a couple of comments and points to bring in, but I mean, this one from Trey was quite long, but um, this is whether or not truth has been dead for a while, and the way in which different representations of different situations are an indicator of that. I mean, I certainly agree there's no such thing as objectivity.
Right.
I think, nonetheless, even without objectivity, there are things which are more accurate or less accurate. And I think you
Sure.
can definitely take news organizations to task in this way. I personally am not sure. To me, this is conflating a number of things about objectivity, accuracy, representation, and then the larger notion of truth. But what's your sense?
Well, it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, I mean, look, there are so many different. There's like 14 different discussions in this question tray. I'm not sure how to answer honestly. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think ultimately, look, is there objectivity? No, but I don't think. I mean, it's not really about objectivity. This, as you say, there never really has been. I mean, every magazine, every newspaper has a point of view. So that objectivity is gone from the start, from the editing, the editorial board. You know, there's no such thing. I think it's more about this work, or my work rather, is more about like I guess the idea that we used to have a shared visual truth, and we don't have that anymore,
Yeah.
right? And also, because everyone has their own, as we were saying earlier, because everyone has their own version of truth, everyone's going to have their own. Each tiny tribe will have their own shared visual history.
Yeah.
Of what's real and what's not.
Experienced street photographer, cinema photographer. Is there a difference between these created stills and individual frames from a
Yeah,
creative
I mean,
imagination?
but look, you're not wrong, David. You could, if you printed out images but the difference is the ease to make those images from Saving Private Ryan. Someone, you'd have to have a multi-million-dollar budget. Now you just have to have a phone,
Yeah.
and you can reach millions of people. So that's the difference. That's the point I'm making with AI and this work. Yeah, sure, I could go out and recreate those images, but I'd need a whole film crew and hundreds of extras and planes and explosions and tanks. That's beyond the budget currently, sadly.
For the foreseeable future.
That's right, unless, yeah.
Yeah. Another good point from David.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm all for this. Is the thing I always get to. We always get to in these kind of discussions is, yes, AI work should be identified, but my issue is that I think it's a bit of a fantasy, because I think the way the world works now, the way social media works now, the way the phone works now is, what if someone does a screenshot, crops it, and then emails it or messages it, DMs it to someone, or posts it on their stories? All of a sudden, that context is lost. The issue is that the way in which that we attach context is so easily removed.
Yeah.
I think. And so, next thing you know, it's a TikTok. It's part of it. It's a clip in a TikTok still or reel or whatever it happens to be. So I think in an ideal world, yes, that's what would happen. But I think that's kind of almost I don't know how that works in practice.
Yeah. Well, I think that, in essence, it sounds like in the exhibition in Normandy, you provided the context at the end when you
Oh,
did
for
the
sure.
big
Yeah,
reveal.
no, absolutely. I mean, look, I try and I always mention, unless I just forget because I'm senile, that it's an AI generated image.
Yeah.
Then, of course, I have to deal with all the associated, like, rage mobbing that happens.
So we have a little bit more time for a couple more questions if people want to drop that into the chat. But Phil, what are you working on now? Do you have another? I mean, do you think you're exclusively working in AI for the foreseeable future, or are you still going to do the sort of conceptual, constructed work that you began with?
Well, I guess that I'm working on a sequel to Another America called Another England, which is set in England in the 1980s. And I guess that I'm finding it so exhilarating, just the idea of being able to kind of create such a complete world. I mean, the depth of information or depth of the world you can create with AI is limitless, and that's really exciting to me.
Yeah.
But that's a really good question, Susan, and I think, I mean, David and I had a long and slightly miserable conversation about the current state of America. And, on the one hand, I've done a lot of political work in the past. And I would like to do that, although the consequences now are much more serious to consider. But I would like to do, I mean, it has to be, The reason I use AI is because I'm talking about the demise of truth, and I have to use the tool that is affecting the demise of truth. So that's why I use AI. So I wouldn't. Am I going to use it forever or for the foreseeable future? Yes, if it's conceptually correct for the idea. I mean, I would like to make something politically charged. I was actually, I was telling Carla, my wife, this in the car the other day. I feel like, and it's really a weird place to be. I always made political art without fear before, but now I have fear. And it's a very strange sensation. But I was thinking, how great it would be to start making to release these audio recordings of people talking about, like people in Trump's cabinet talking about how Trump was a buffoon. And you do them as released audio recordings, and I'd create them entirely with AI, just release them onto the web and see what happened, because that's exactly the kind of thing that would make him insane. And see if you could affect political change that way. I mean, I know but then I think I've got a wife, I've got a daughter, I live in New York. I mean, I'm sure there would be consequences, and that's a crazy statement to be able to have.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous to have to think about
Yeah.
that. Jürgen has a question going back to emotion. I wasn't avoiding the question, Jürgen. I'm just trying to cope with the ones that are coming in, but we'll get this one asked.
Well, again, I can't answer. I wish I could, Jürgen. I don't know is a simple answer. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just know what people told me and what I observed when they were looking at my stuff. Actually, funnily enough, they had a Capa show earlier in the month before in the same space. I should have followed people around and listened to their conversations and done some sort of comparison. But I have no way of comparing.
Yeah.
And I also think that it's different if you're a photojournalist looking at pictures versus if you're just a normal person looking at pictures. I think you're going to have a different context, a different understanding of things, and probably a different reaction.
Yeah. Trey would like a little bit more information on
Hardware
the
tools. Of course, happy to. The Midjourney is the real thing. Is the only thing I use for generation. And it's interesting because Midjourney, you can select which version. So you can go from, I think, version 4 to version 6.2. I think we're at now. But if you use the earlier versions of Midjourney, I think this is really interesting. You get more what people call hallucinations. And I think I find those fascinating because that's kind of the voice of AI speaking to us. And as Midjourney, as it gets better at emulating photography, it becomes less imaginative. And I think that's kind of sad. I wonder if in a few years' time, all the young kids will be, in the same way they use like video cameras from the 80s, like the Fisher Price pixel camera or whatever, because these old technologies are imperfect and interesting. I wonder if we'll start going back to earlier versions of Midjourney precisely because that's where you saw the voice of AI speak. Sorry, that was a tangent. So I use Midjourney, and then I also use Topaz, which is just an up-resing app program. So it's extraordinary. Like you can take a 1.3 meg file and turn it into a 300 meg file and print it, 4 foot, which is just miraculous.
Yeah. So Lauren was not persuaded by your answer earlier about using AI to question the death of truth and so on. So she wants to pose.
Okay, well, I'm going to really push back. I think I get what you're saying, but I'm going to, first of all, I take umbrage with your comparison to rape and murder, because I don't think that this is nearly the same thing. And I think that's honestly a bullshit thing to say, for starters. But I think that you have to have the conversation. And if you don't have the conversation in a reasoned manner, then there's no conversation at all. And then you leave it to the bad actors to push that conversation. And I think it's better for people who have good intentions to have that conversation than to leave it up to other people.
Very good. We have time for maybe one more question, I think. No one's dropping in. So a lot of people have been appreciative of your curiosity and giving food for thought.
Thank you for that.
So
I mean, honestly, I do appreciate you guys inviting me. I know that this is so contrary to what you do and how you see the world. And I also, you know, as I said earlier, I don't live in your world. I have the luxury of living in the world of the artist, where there is more permissiveness for exploration, I guess. But I would also say, I think in leaving you guys, I would say one final thing about the role of AI in journalism, not photojournalism, but journalism. And I think this is actually happening already. But let's just have a hypothetical discussion where let's just agree that the role of journalism and photojournalism is to bring light to things that need light, and to hopefully change those things. And let's say in this hypothetical discussion that there is a person who is in a North Korean labor camp and they've escaped, and they've been there and they have experience there. And I work with that person to make images based on their words.
Yeah.
And then those images with those words accompanying bring change.
Yeah.
Would that not be a beneficial thing?
Yeah.
And I mentioned, I raised this hypothetical in a talk the other day, and this young photojournalist was utterly outraged with that idea. But I think that going forward, we have to just, AI is here. And as I mentioned to you earlier, David, being angry about it or upset about it serves no purpose.
Yeah.
The only thing that is worthwhile is examining it, using it, deciding whether you can use it for good, because it's going to be used.
Yeah, yeah. So Fred Richard, in his new book, Synthetic Eye, which is about artificial intelligence, comes up with a number of examples that are about either imagining future possibilities or imagining things that can't be photographed, a bit like your North Korean example. And someone just said, isn't that illustration? And yes.
It is illustration, but the thing is that it's more powerful than illustration because it looks like a photograph, and we are primed to believe photographs. We are more open, I think, to be moved by an image that looks like a photograph than an image that's an illustration.
Yeah, yeah. One of the
illustration, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the examples that Fred has in his book, and which I've also used in presentations and have a link in my article, is to a thing called Exhibit AI, made by a law firm in Australia that was representing refugees and asylum seekers who.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, same idea.
They had been moved offshore to camps, which were disgusting, to which no media was allowed, to which no photographers could enter. They worked with these refugees with their written testimony, created the images, then checked the images back with the refugees and so on.
Yeah.
Made it very clear this was an AI project, but thought that the power of something that was beyond an illustration was a stronger way of getting those refugee stories out.
I saw that work and I loved that idea. My only issue was I thought the imagery was actually pretty mediocre at best.
Yeah.
But that is a perfect example.
Yeah.
What's that?
I think the concept was
the concept is great, and I think, and I think that the power of imagery that looks like photography has the power to move, and if you can use it for good, like in that case, why not use that?
Yeah, and then Dennis makes the point that maybe in situations where you're protecting people's identity and so on. So there are possibilities. And I think, as much as you've said, we're in different worlds and there are different limits and so on, I think that we understand our limits and our purposes, actually, if we combine these conversations, which is why we are so glad to have had you do this presentation, because I think that understanding the purpose of visual journalism is much clearer when you know where the boundaries are and the limits are and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And you have to have the other side of the coin for that. So I really appreciate
the side of the coin.
Yeah. Well, I don't believe in a both sides argument, but I do think that sort of understanding the fuzzy nature of borders, and I think they're probably a bit more fuzzy than a lot of us.
You don't think there are very good people on both sides? To quote Donald.
Well, I don't think I would ever quote Donald, I'm afraid. So, but we'll leave that for another day. Well,
That's
Phil,
right.
I really want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank everyone in the audience for coming. I know you have other commitments to get to. We will have a recording of this up on the website, and I look forward to doing more discussions and presentations like this.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.